Aquinas Academy Summer School, January 2002. Spirituality in Australia Today. This is the first of two tapes of the presentation and open forum given by Les Murray.
The stock exchange scribblers forget the chalk in their hands, and men with bread in their pockets leave the Greek club. There's a fella crying in Martin Place, they can't stop him. The traffic in George Street is banked up for half a mile and drained of motion. The crowds are edgy with talk, and more crowds come hurrying. Many run in the back streets, which minutes ago were busy main streets, pointing. There's a fellow weeping down there, no one can stop him. The man we surround, the man no one approaches, simply weeps and doesn't cover it. Weeps not like a child, not like the wind, like a man, and doesn't declaim it, nor beat his breast, nor even sob very loudly. Yet the dignity of his weeping holds us back from his face, the hollow he makes about him in the midday light in his pentagram of sorrow. And uniforms back in the crowd who tried to seize him stare out at him and feel with amazement their minds longing for tears, as children for a rainbow. Some will say in the years to come a halo or force stood round him. There is no such thing. Some will say they were shocked and would have stopped him, but they will not have been there. The fiercest manhood, the toughest reserve, the slickest wit amongst us trembles with silence and burns with unexpected judgments of peace. Some in the concourse scream who thought themselves happy. Only the smallest children and such as look out of paradise come near him and sit at his feet with dogs and dusty pigeons. Ridiculous, says a man near me and stops his mouth with his hands as if it uttered vomit. And I see a woman shining stretch her hand and shake as she receives the gift of weeping. As many as follow her also receive it. And many weep for sheer acceptance, and more refuse to weep for fear of all acceptance. But the weeping man, like the earth, requires nothing. The man who weeps ignores us and cries out of his writhen face and ordinary body, not words but grief, not messages but sorrow, hard as the earth, sheer present as the sea. And when he stops, he simply walks between us, mopping his face with the dignity of one man who has wept and now has finished weeping. Evading believers, he hurries off down Pitt Street. I, at one stage, because I didn't know I was having a nervous breakdown, was very poor in this town. I was sort of street people. And that was a good experience in many ways. And this little poem comes out of that. It's called Incorrigible Grace. St. Vincent de Paul, old friend, my sometime tailor, I dare say by now you're feeding the rich in heaven. That's a Catholic poem. The Broad Bean Sermon. Beanstalks in any breeze or a slack church parade without belief saying trespass against us in unison. Recruits in mid-Air Force Dacron with unbuttoned leaves. Upright with water like men square in stem section, they grow to great lengths, drink rain, keel over all ways, kink down and grow up afresh with proffered new green stuff. Above the cat and mouse floor of a thin bean forest, snails hang wrapped in their food. Ants hurry through several dimensions. Spiders tense and sag like little black flags in their cordage. Going out to pick beans with the sun high as fence tops, you find plenty and fetch them. An hour or a cloud later you find shirtfuls more. At every hour of daylight appear more that you missed. Ripe, knobbly ones, fleshy-sided, thin, straight, thin crescent, frown-shaped, bird-shouldered, boat-keeled ones. Beans knuckled and single-bulged, minute green dolphins that suck. Beans upright like lecturing, outstretched like blessing fingers in the incident light, and more still oblique to your notice that the noon glare or cloud light or afternoon slants will uncover. Till you ask yourself, could I have overlooked so many, or do they form in an hour? Unfolding into reality like templates for subtly broad grins, like unique court expressions, like edible meanings, each sealed around with a string and affixed to its moment, an unceasing colloquial assembly, the portly, the stiff, and those lolling in pointed green slippers. Wondering who'll take the spare bagfuls, you grin with happiness. It is your health. You vow to pick them all, even the last few, weeks off yet, misshapen as toes. The gum forest, which is where I come from, really. I guess I come from a veranda near a gum forest. The gum forest. After the last gapped wire on a post, homecoming for me to enter the gum forest. This old, slow battlefield, pairings of armour, cracked collars, elbows scattered on the ground. New trees step out of old, lemon and oak are splitting out of grey everywhere in the gum forest. In there for miles, shade track and ironbark slope, depth casually beginning all around at a little distance, sky sifting and always a hint of smoke in the light. You can never reach the heart of the gum forest. In here is like a great yacht harbour, charmed to leaves, innumerable tackle, poles wrapped in spattered sail, or an unknown army in reserve for centuries. Flooded gums on creek ground each call because of each. Now a blackbutt in bloom is showering with bees, but warm blood sleeps in the middle of the day. The witching hour is noon in the gum forest. Foliage builds like a layering splash, groundwater dryly upheld in edge-on, wax-rolled, ghoul-puckered leaves upon leaves, the shoal life of parrots up there. Stone footings, trunk shattered, non-human lights, enormous abandoned machines, the mysteries of the gum forest. Delight to me, though, at the water-smuggling creeks. Health to me, too, under Banksia candles and combs. A wind is up, rubbing limbs above the bullock roads. Mountains are waves in the ocean of the gum forest. I go my way, looking back sometimes, looking round me. Singed oils clear my mind and the pouring sound high up. Why have I denied the passions of my time? To see lightning strike upward out of the gum forest. The future. There is nothing about it. Much science fiction is set there, but it's not about it. Prophecy is not about it. It sways no yarrow stalks, and crystal is a mirror. Even the man we nailed on a tree for a lookout said little about it. He told us evil would come. We see by convention a small living distance into it, but even that's a projection. And all our projections fail to curve where it curves. It is the black hole, out of which no radiation escapes to us. The commonplace and magnificent roads of our lives go on some way through cityscape and landscape, or steeply sloping or scree, into that sheer fall where everything will be that we have ever sent there, compacted, spinning, except perhaps us to see it. It's said we see the start. But from here there's a blindness. The side-heaped chasm that will swallow all our present blinds us to the normal sun that may be imagined shining calmly away on the far side of it for others in their ordinary day. A day to which all our portraits, ideals, revolutions, denim and déshabille are quaintly heartrending. To see those people is impossible. To greet them, mawkish. Nonetheless, I begin, when I was alive, and I am turned around to find myself looking at a cheerful picnic party. The women decently legless in muslin and gloves. The men in beards and waistcoats with the long cheroots and duck trousers of the better sort, relaxing on a stone veranda, Ceylon or Sydney. And as I look, I know they are utterly gone. Each one on his day with pillows, small bottles, mist. With all the futures they dreamed or dealt in, going down to that engulfment, everything approaches. With the man on the tree, they have vanished into the future. Little story there. Words change, it's strange stuff to paint in language because the meanings of words change. The word gay suddenly became unusable in, 25 years ago, for probably another generation or two. The word legless, when I used that, I just meant women's long dresses of the 19th century. Wow, when I was 12, my mother died, and I wrote 3 poems, one of them rather long. It was sort of trying to work out the meaning of exactly what happened, and 2 of them short. I'll read you one of the short ones. It's called Midsummer Ice. Remember how I used to carry ice in from the road for the ice chest, half running? The white rectangle clamped in bare hands, the only utter cold in all those summer paddocks? How, swaying, I'd hurry it inside, en bloc and watering with the butter and the wrapped bread precarious on top of it. Poor Leslie, you would say, your hands are cold as charity. You made me take the barrow, but uphill it was heavy. We'd no tongs, and a bag would have soaked and bumped off balance. I loved to eat the ice, chip it out with a butcher knife's grey steel. It stopped good things rotting, and it had a strange comb at its heart, a splitted horizon rife with zero pearls. But you don't remember. A doorstep of numbed creek water the colour of tears, but you don't remember. I will have to die before you remember. I've got a few poems about my mother. Most of them are kind of sort of memories of the 12 years that I knew her, this one's probably, it would be the first city I ever saw, which was Newcastle, a place I'm still fond of, and she came from there. And my grandfather on that side, whom I never met because he died of breathing too much coal dust, he was an employee of a fellow called John Brown, a man who owned a lot of coal mines in the Hunter Valley. They died the same year, 1930. The smell of coal smoke. John Brown glowing far and down. Wartime Newcastle was a brown town. Hand-rolled cough and cardigan, rain on paving bricks, big smoke to a 4-year-old from the green sticks. Train city, mother city, coming on dark. Japanese shell holes, awesome in a park. Electric light and upstairs encountered first that day. Sailors and funny ladies in Jerry's Fish Cafe. It is always evening on those earliest trips, raining through the tram wires where blue glare rips across the gaze of wonderment and leaves thrilling tips. The steelworks vast, roof debris, unrolling falls of smoky, stunning orange, its eye-hurting slump walls, mellow to lounge interiors, cut pile and curry brown with the pear's soap-smelling fire, and a sense of ships mourning to each other below in the town. This was my mother's childhood and her difference, her city-brisk relations who valued sense, talking strike and colliery, engineering, fowls and war, Brown's grit and miners breathing it years before. As I sat near the fire, raptly touching coal, its blockage, slick yet dusty, prisms massed and dense in the iron scuttle, its hammered bulky roll into the glaring grate to fracture and shoal. Its chips you couldn't draw with on the cement made it a stone, tar crockery, different. And I had 3 grandparents while others had 4. Where was my mother's father, never called poor? In his tie and his Vauxhall that had a boat bow driving up the coalfields, but where was he now? Coal smoke as much as gum trees now had a tight scent to summon deep brown evenings of the Japanese War, to conjure gaslit pub yards, their razory frisson, and sense my dead grandfather, the Grafton Cornishman, rising through the night schools by the pressure in his chest as his lungs creaked like mahogany with the grains of John Brown. His city, mother city, at its starriest, as swearing men with doctors' bags streamed by toward the docks, past the smoke-frothing wooden train that would take us home soon, with our day-old hen-home chickens peeping in their box. And this one is called the dark. The last interior is darkness, befuddled past midnight fear, testing each step like deep water, that when you open the eventual refrigerator, cold but no light will envelop you. Bony hurts that persuade you the names of your guides now are balance and gravity. You can fall up things, but not far. A stopping, teeming caution as of prey. The dark is arbitrary, delivering wheeled smashes, murmuring something that's scuttled, door jams without a switch. The dark has no subject matter, but is alive with theory. Its best respites are no surprises, nothing touching you, or panic-stilling chance embraces. Darkness is the cloth for pained eyes and lovely in colour, splendid in the lungs of great singers. Also the needed matrix of constellations, flaring ginzas, desert moons, apparent snow, veranda-edged night rain. Dark is like that, all productions. Almost nothing there is caused or has results. Dark is all one interior, permitting only inner life, concealing what will seize it. I've only ever written about 3 sports poems in my life, and the best one's this one. I think it's about fencing. Our son Daniel used to be good at it, and he was in the fencing class under a bloke who used to represent Italy in the Olympics, but who lived here. And so he was going up one night to his fencing class, and I said, there's a poem in that, Daniel. He looked at me with slight horror of a 16-year-old thinking, with any bad luck, I'm going to end up in a poem. But he was talking a lot about duelling in those days. He was fascinated by that subject. And this poem sort of visits that. It is a kind of time travel. And it's called Time Travel for Daniel. To revisit the Spitfire world of the duel, you put on a suit of white body armour, a helmet like an insect's composite eye, and step out like a spacewalker under haloed lights trailing a cord. Descending with nodding foil in hand towards the pomander and cravat sphere, you meet the opponent. For this journey can only be accomplished by a pair who semaphore and swap quick respect before they set about their joint effect, which is making zeros and serifs so swiftly and with such sprung variety that the long steel skid clatter, zing, switch, batter, bite, kiss and ring in the complex rhythms of that society with its warrior snare of comme il faut, that has you facing a starched bow near stable walls on a misty morning, striking, seeking the surrender in him, the pedigree floor through which to pin him, he probing for your own braggadocio, confusion, ennui or inner fawning. Seconds look holding stakes and cloths look grim and surge a step. Exchanges halt, for one of you stands aging horribly. collapses, drowning from an entry of narrow hurt. The other gulps hot chocolate, a trifle fast, but talking nonchalant. A buzzer sounds. Heads are tucked under arms, and you and he swap curt nods in a more Christian century. Funny paradox, that one. It's supposed to be a very post-Christian century, this one, and yet some things that were all the, the ordinary order of things in the past disappeared in the 20th century. Some things became more Christian as society was supposed to become less so. I mentioned that I come from a I'll read this one. It's called louvers. Doubtless everybody remembers them. I think probably some around this building. Glass louvers. I once lived in a house briefly in Darwin, which all the walls of which were louvers, glass louvers which open and shut. In the banana zone in the Poinciana tropics, reality is stacked on hand's breadth shelving, open and shut. It is ruled across with lines, as in a gleaming, gritty exercise book. The world is seen through a cranked or levered weatherboarding of explosive glass, angled floor to ceiling. Horizons which meet the dazzling outdoors into green-edged couplets. In the louvered latitudes, children fly to sleep in triplanes, and cool nights are eerie with retracting flaps. Their houses stand aloft among bougainvillea, covered bridges that lead down a shining hall from love to mystery to breakfast, from babyhood to moving out day. And visitors shimmer up in columnar gauges to touch lives lived behind gauze in a lantern of inventory. There, nudity is dizzily cubist, and directions have to include stage left, add an inch of breeze, or enter a glistening tendril. Every building of jinked and slatted ledges is at times a squadron of inside-out helicopters humming with rotor fans. For drinkers under cyclonic pressure, such a house could be a bridge of scythes. Groundlings scuffing by stop only for denouement. But everyone comes out on platforms of command to survey cloudy flame trees, the plain of streets, the future, only then descending to the level of affairs. And if these things are done in the green season, what to do in the crystalline dry? Well, below in the struts of laundry is the four-wheel drive vehicle in which to make an expedition to the bush, or as we now say, the land. The 3/4 of our continent set aside for mystic poetry. I think even if you set 3/4 of the continent aside, you've still got about 5 Great Britons. There's been a lot of talk lately about the envy of the poor people of the world for the rich people of the world, which I think is a lot less real than people say. I think a lot of people are so poorly informed in the wider world they don't know where the riches are. And I think envy has to be recommended to you before you think of it. But there was a wonderful small case of it up home once. A fellow won the lottery and didn't know that you don't publish your name in the paper when don't allow your name to appear. And oh boy, he learned about the envy of poverty for wealth. Called Letters to the Winner. After the war and just after marriage and fatherhood ended in divorce, our neighbour won the special lottery. An amount then equal to 15 years of a manager's salary at the bank, or 50 years' earnings by a marginal farmer fermenting his clothes in the black marinade of sweat up in his mill logging paddocks. The district, used to 1 mailbag, now received 2 every mail day. The fat one was for our neighbour. After a dip or two, he let these bags accumulate around the plank walls of the kitchen, over the chairs, till on a rainy day he fed the tail-switching calves, let the bullocks out of the yard, and pausing at the door to wash his hands, came inside to read the letters. Shaken out in a vast mound on the kitchen table, they slid down, slithered to his fingers. I have 7 children, I am under the doctor. If you could see your way clear, equal partners in the venture, God would bless you, lovey, assured of our best service. For a mere £15 down, remember you're only lucky. I knew you from the paper straight away. Backsheesh, hissed the pages as he flattened them. Backsheesh. Mate, if you're interested in a fellow digger's problems, old mate, a friend in need, the great golden letter having come, now he was being punished for it. You sound like a lovely big boy. We could have such times. Here's my photo doll. I'm wearing my birthday swimsuit. With the right man, I would share this infallible system. When he'd lifted the stove's iron lid and started feeding in the pages he'd read, they clutched and streamed up the corrugated black chimney shaft. And yet he went on reading, holding each page by its points, feeling an obligation to read each crude rehearsed lie, each come-on, flat truth, extremity. We might visit you, the wise investor, alone, a bushman like you. Remember we met on Roma Street. For your delight and mine, a lick of the Sultana. The white moraine kept slipping its messages to him. You will be accursed, he husked them like cobs. Mr. Nouveau Jack, old man, my legs are all paralysed up. Black smut swirled weightless in the room. Some good, kind person, like the nausea of a novice free-falling in a deep mind's cage. Now I have lost his pension and formed a sticky nimbus round him. But he read on, fascinated by a further human range. Not even war had taught him, nor literature glossed for him, since he never read literature. Merely the great reject pile which high style is there to snub and filter for readers. That his one day's reading had a strong taste of what he and war had made of his marriage is likely. He was not without sympathy. But his leap had hit a wire through which the human is policed. His head throbbed as if busting with a soundless shout of immemorial sobbed invective, God forsaken, as he stopped reading and sat blackened in his riches. Poetry and religion. Religions are poems. They concert our daylight and dreaming mind, our emotions, instinct, breath and native gesture into the only whole thinking, poetry. Nothing's said till it's dreamed out in words, and nothing's true that figures in words only. A poem compared with an arrayed religion may be like a soldier's one short marriage night to die and live by, but that is a small religion. Full religion is the large poem in loving repetition. Like any poem, it must be inexhaustible and complete, with turns where we ask, now why did the poet do that? You can't pray a lie, said Huckleberry Finn. You can't poe one either. It is the same mirror. Mobile, glancing, we call it poetry. Fixed centrally, we call it a religion. And God is the poetry caught in any religion. Caught, not imprisoned. Caught as in a mirror that he attracted, being in the world as poetry is in the poem, a law against its closure. There'll always be religion around while there is poetry, or a lack of it. Both are given and intermittent as the action of those birds, crested pigeon, rosella parrot, who fly with wings shut, then beating, and again shut. The tin wash dish. Lank poverty, dank poverty. Its pants wear through at fork and knee. It warms its hands over burning shames, refers to its fate as them and he, and delights in things by their hard names, rag and toe jam, feed and paw. Don't guts that down, there ain't no more. Dank poverty, rank poverty. It hums with a grim fidelity like wood rot with a hint of orifice. Wet newspaper jammed in the gaps of artifice, and disgusts us into a fierce loyalty. It's never the fault of those you love. Poverty comes down from above. Let it dance chairs and smash the door. It arises from all that went before, and every outsider's the enemy. Jesus Christ turned this over with his stick, and knights and philosophers turned it back. Rank poverty, lank poverty, chafe in its crutch and sores in its hair. Still a window's clean if it's made of air, not webby silver like a sleeve. Watch out if this does well at school and has to leave and longs to leave. Someone, sometime, will have to pay. Shave with toilet soap, run to flesh, astound the nation, rule the army. Still you wait for the day you'll be sent back where books or toys on the floor are rubbish, and no one's allowed to come and play because home calls itself a shack, and hot water crinkles in the tin wash dish. We were talking the other day to people about crops that have been a curse on humankind. Cotton, to some extent. Sugar very much so, because sugar caused slavery and the invention of racism and all that. This poem is called High Sugar. Honey gave sweetness to Athens and Rome, and later when splendour might rise nearer home, sweetness was still honey. Since, pious or lax, every cloister had its apiary for honey and wax. But when kings and new doctrines drained those deep hives, then millions of people were shipped from their lives to grow the high sugar from which were refined frigates, perukes, human races, and the liberal mind. Sometimes poems, of course, can't be all business. Sometimes they're just for the pure fun of it. This one is called On Removing Spiderweb. Like summer silk it's denier, but stickily, oh icklier. Miffed bunny blinder, silver tar, gesticuli, gesticular. Crepe when cobbed, crap when rubbed, stretchily at here and there and every way, nap snarled or sleek, glibly hubbed with grots to tweak, weekly bobbin tiar neb, spitted, foot twee, filthy web. An era. The poor were fat and the rich were lean. Nearly all could preach, very few could sing. The fashionable were all one age, and to them a church picnic was the very worst thing. I sometimes think I'm a bit frivolous. There we are. This one, the last 6 lines of this poem are in English, but they're in Bat English. I was out to catch a sense of the wonderful, strange world of radar that bats live in, so I invented a language for it. The poem is called Bat's Ultrasound. Sleeping bagged in a duplex wing with fleas in rock cleft or building, radar bats are darkness in miniature. Their whole face one tufty, crinkled ear, with weak eyes, fine teeth bared to sing. Few are vampires, none flit through the mirror. Where they flutter at evening's a queer tonal hunting zone above highest sea. Insect prey at the peak of our hearing drone ray to their detailing tea. Ah, irie, iro, our, eh? Or area, our ear, I, your roar, row. We air our array, your rai, or our eerie, our ray, our arrow, our rare ear, our eerie Yahweh. English poet called Simon Curtis told me this story. He was in Central Australia and he nearly went up in a balloon one day, but he wanted to keep his money to make the trip last a bit longer, and it was quite expensive to go up in this hot air balloon, so he didn't. And it crashed, carrying to their deaths a couple of people. The sister and the mother of a woman I know whose husband is a teacher in another of Sydney's schools. So she became an orphan and an only child that day, and awful. And he watched it from the ground. The poem is called Suspended Vessels. Here is too narrow and brief. Equality and justice to be real require the timeless. It argues afterlife even to name them. I've thought this more since that morning in barren country, vast as space-time but affluent with cars, at the fence where my tightening budget denied me basket room under the haunches of a hot air balloon, and left 13 people in it, all ages, teens to grands, laughing excitedly as the drag and nozzle exhaled hoarse blazing lift, taunting it, till they grabbed, dragged, swayed, up into their hiatus. Others were already aloft, I remember, light bulbs against the grizzled mountain ridge and bare sky, vertical yachts with blurb spinnakers. More were being rigged or offering their gape for gusts of torch. I must have looked away. Suddenly a cry erupted everywhere. Two far up lay overlapping, corded and cheeked as the foresails of a ship, but tangled and one collapsing. I suppress in my mind the long rag unravelling, the mixed high voice of its spinning fall, the dust blast crash, the privacies and hideous equality without justice of those 13, which running helpers halting must have seen. Instead I look at coloured cash and plastic and toddlerhood's vehement equities that are never quite silenced. Indeed it prickles and soon glares if people do not voice them. Time's getting away faster than I thought it might, so I'll start economising on reading these poems to you. I'll read this one though, about the experience of dying, which I did about 4 or 5 years ago, but I came back. I was in a coma for 3 weeks, and going into the coma and thinking, well, this may well not come back in this world, was interesting. You're never quite the same after that. You find you can leave it all. Like a charging man hit and settling face down in the ringing, his cause and panic obsolete. You find you can leave it all. Your loved people, pain, achievement, dwindling upstream of this raftfall. Back with the dishes that translated beasts and croplands into the ongoing self-portrait your genes had mandated. Ribbed fluorescent panels flow over you down urgent corridors, dismissing midday outside. Slow they'd resemble wet spade widths in a pit. You've left grief behind you for others. Your funeral, who'll know you'd replanned it? God at the end of prose, somehow be our poem. When forebrainy consciousness goes, wordless selves it had barely met, inertias of rhythm, the life habit, continue the battle for you. If enough of these hold, you may wake up in this world, ache-boned, tear-sponged, dripped into. Do you know your name? Yes, won't do. It's before again with shadow. No tunnels. You're a trunk of prickling cells. It's the evening of some day, but it's also afterlife from here on by that consent you found in you to going where you went. The Holy Show. I was a toddler, wet-combed with my pants buttoned to my shirt, and there were pink and green lights, pretty in the day, a Christmas tree party up the back of the village store. I ran towards it, but big sad people stepped out. They said over me, "It's just like for local kiddies," and Bart let him join in. The kiddies looked frightened, and my parents, caught off guard, one beat behind me, grabbed me up in the great shame of our poverty that they talked about to upset themselves. They were blushing and smiling, cursing me in low voices, little bugger, bad boy, for thinking Happy Christmas undivided, whereas it's all owned to buy in parcels and have at home. For still not knowing you don't make a holy show of your family, outside it there's only Parry in front. Once away they angrily softened to me, squalling because I was their kiddie and had been right about the holy show that models how the world should be, and could be, shared, glittering in near focus, right out to the sex frontier. Oh dear, this Sydney is a bad town for humidity. Where I come from, it's all droughty and dry. The air is beautifully crystalline and dry. But this book is it's coming out next month. It's called Poems the Size of Photographs, and because most of the poems are short. And I mean, how big's a photograph? You know? But I'll just read you some of these short little poems. This one's called because I'm not very fond of stoicism, it's called The Successive Arms. A drunk man in a rank shirt unsteadily walks the street begging. An arms flick up, dismissing him. Piss off, mate. He recedes far along, still groggily reviewing backhand salutes, till you can trace him only by the erupting stoic arms. The Moon Man. Shadowy kangaroos moved off as we drove into the top paddock, coming home from a wedding under a midnightish curd sky. Then his full face cleared, Moon Man, the first birth ever, who still massages his mother and sends her late, for his having been born fully grown. His brilliance is in our blood. Had Earth fully healed from that labour, no small births could have happened. Sucker. Refugees, derelicts, but why classify people in the wreck of their terms? These wear mixed and accidental clothing and are seated at long tables in rows. It's like a school, and the lesson has moved now from papers to round volumes of steaming food, which they seem to treat like knowledge, relearning it slowly, copying it to themselves with hesitant spoons. Pre-dawn in health. The stars are filtering through a tree outside in the moon's silent era. Reality is moving layer over layer like crystal spheres now called laws. The future is right behind your head. Just over all horizons is the past. The soul sits looking at its offer. Lace curtain. All politeness, all endearments are known as palaver once you're inside that love. It is a compound to keep out the world, and nearly everyone, even within it, has a contempt name. You are in on a stare, a style of looking down, and what is counted worth saying is what has turned all stuff that housefly colour. This chap I picked up once hitchhiking, an old Aboriginal man, a countryman. On the long flats north of the river, an elder in a leather jacket is hitchhiking to his daughter's funeral. In a time of cuisine, a fact the gourmet euphemism can't silence. Vegetarians eat sex, carnivores eat violence. One of my few poems that's absolutely straight out portrait of one of the holy people. This one's St. Joseph. This poem is called The Pay for Fosterage. The carpenter could have stayed hunched over at work on his chagrin, left everything to the hush-ups and stone evadings of women. He could have escaped the thousands of years of speculation, the horns, but all that weakness was behind him. The courteous presence had spoken unearthly sense to its equal, himself, as he would be from now on into the world to come. And this one comes from a little limewood statue in the National Gallery in Canberra. It's a Pietà from the Middle Ages, and it's slightly damaged. Our Lady in it used to have a hairpiece of, but it seems to have vanished, and she's got a head that looks a little burnt. And I thought, Orthodox Jewish lady wears a sheitel, you know, a hairpiece, a wig, and she's lost her sheitel, she's lost her wig. And very stark and simple work, this one. It's called Pietà, once attributed to Cosmitura, whoever Cosmitura was, but it was attributed to him. This is the nadir of the story. His mother's hairpiece, her sheitel, is torn away. Her own cropped hair looks burnt. She had said the first Mass and made Godhead a fact. which his strangeness had kept proving. But what of that is still true now with his limp weight at her knee? Her arms open and withdraw and come back. That first Eucharist she could have been stoned to death for is still alive in her body. The knockdown question. Why does God not spare the innocent? The answer to that is not in the same world as the question. So you would shrink from me in terror if I could answer it. The poisons of right and left. You are what you have got, and to love you have to hate. Two ideas that have killed and maimed holocausts and myriads. At university, Puritans reckoned the cadavers in anatomy were drunks off the street. Idealists said they were benefactors who had willed their bodies to science. But the averted manila-coloured people on the tables had pin-back graves excavated in them, around which they lay scattered in the end as if exhumed from themselves. The meaning of existence. Everything except language knows the meaning. Planets, rivers, time know nothing else. They express it moment by moment as the universe. But even this fool of a body lives it in part, and would have full dignity within it but for the ignorant freedom of my talking mind. Music. This is part of a longer poem about music. Music is the great nonsense poem, written for recital, if at all, in the old bonding lingo of cry that we translate experience into. Dilly-o, Johnny Ringo, bye-bye, to check with the tree nests of home. Music is the vast nonsense poem our precisions float out on with emotion, to change and get poignant as they drown. La musique, it needs no translation. It can back up or send up any line. It makes even the thought police hum. Tart angel that never lost heaven, oh whaley the faraway wine. Music is the great nonsense poem, the religion no hard nose rejects, not trapped in the medium of critics. Oh harmonium, the zillion-armed I'll finish up with a very recent couple of poems, a little short one and a slightly longer one. That'll do us for now. The averted. The one whose eyes do not meet yours is alone at heart and looks where the dead look for a comrade in his cause. And this one is called Post-Mortem. I was upstaged in Nottingham after reading poetry there by what lay in the porter's room above. Ginger human skeletons, 8 of them. Disturbed by extensions to the Arts Centre and reassembled from the dozer's shove, some might have been my ancestors, Nottingham being where my mother's people fled from in the English Civil War. These were older than that migration, crusty little roundheads of sleep, stick bundles half burned to clay by water. Their personhoods had gone into the body of that promise preached to them. What had stayed in their bones were their diseases, the marks of labour in a rope-furrowed shoulder blade, their ages when they died and what they'd eaten. Bread, bacon, beer, cheese, apples, greens. No tomato atoms in them, no potato Edens. No coffee yet or tea or aspirin, but alcoholic curds horn-spooned at a fair, and opium physic and peas porridge. The thought that in some cells their programs might persist, my far parentage, attracted me no more than rebuilding faces for them with wire and moulding. Unsatisfied to go as a detective in the past, I want the past live, with the body we have in the promise, that book which opens when the story ends. Being even a sound modern physique is like owning an apartment in Venice. There we go. They say never to read poetry for more than 40 minutes, which is what I did. So any questions or whatever? I got one more short poem to read you a bit later on, which we might finish up with. So, ma'am.
In that poetry and religion, you said God is the poetry trapped in any religious.
Yeah, caught in any religion. Caught, not trapped.
Would you mind elaborating on that?
My daughter, I think, Christina, is 38 now. She was saying is religion universal? Is it everywhere? You know, is everybody religious? And I said every human group we know of has got some kind of religious impulse and imagery, and some idea of sacredness, divine, all that. It's all pointing in that direction, surely. It knows that stuff is there, and it's reaching out for it. It's receiving it. It's either receiving it because intuiting it's there and receiving it because it's speaking to them, or it's wanting it and reaching up for it. And what's most fascinating in any human tradition wherever in the world is the parts that really sort of stop you in your tracks. The parts that you can really feel are of the divine. It goes, I suppose, with the doctrine of in my father's house are many mansions. Yeah.
When did you first start writing poetry, and what brought you into it?
When did I first start? I think I first started trying to write poetry when I was 18. I was just finishing up in a bad high school. And in those days poetry wasn't particularly well taught, and there wasn't much interesting stuff on the course. It was fairly alien to us. It was 18th century European poetry and earlier, the Bard and all that. And it didn't grip us very much. And also, boys in those days, this was before the 1960s, boys in those days were terribly military-minded. We were all heroes. We were going to be in the Third World War. And we had to be tough. And poetry was felt vaguely to be rather sissy stuff, and really unreal. And that mindset all changed, of course, in the 60s, but I remember back there then. And one of our teachers actually liked poetry. His wife pretended to, and he really did. And he introduced us to some modern poetry, and suddenly the inner ears pricked up, and I thought, this stuff is relevant. It's talking about things I know. All it took was relevance to the world I was in. And then the sportsmaster mentioned there was such a thing as a modern Australian poetry, and I said, "You mean Banjo Patterson? That's all I'd heard of, that kind of thing." And no, he said real poetry. And I'm afraid I still hold that view. But although Banjo does appear in person in Freddie Neptune, the verse novel. But I began to read Judith Wright and Douglas Stewart and people like that, and I was completely turned onto it. I thought, yeah, this is what I've been looking for. Because I couldn't paint. I didn't have the motor skill for it or something, but I could think of painting, but I couldn't paint it. I couldn't draw much. Deaf to music, and looking around for an art form I had started to do, and I hadn't found one. I tried writing a novel, and it was atrocious, rubbish, Because I knew nothing about fellow humans at all. I was an only child from the bush. I mean, I hardly knew any human being. And novels have got this insistence on being about people. So when I found poetry, I thought this is a medium in which all things are about equal importance: humans, rocks, trees, mountains, weather, the wind, the lot. And I was completely at home there. That's what I did know. And started trying to write it, and it turned out to be harder to write than I thought. And I liked that because it meant you were never going to master it and get bored with it and leave it behind. You were never going to exhaust it. And
you say you don't paint and draw, but you paint and draw through...
Yes, I use language, yeah. I melt language down and paint with that. Yeah. So, the chap up here.
Can you say a little bit more about the man in An Absolutely Ordinary Rainbow? Is he a Christ figure?
I don't think so. He's got a lot of differences. He doesn't speak for one thing. I knew if he spoke, the whole thing would go flat. It would collapse. He was a figure, and he survives because he is not attached to any particular cause or emotion or tradition or whatever. Any word of explanation would bring the whole thing undone. And it's sort of an apparition, I guess. It was an apparition in my mind. I've got no very clear idea what it means at all, actually. And I started writing a poem about the old coffee shops of Sydney, and which I'd been in love with, and the coffee shops got taken over by this figure in Martin Place, and I followed him. You do that in a poem. You put the plough into the ground, and you've ploughed half a furrow, and suddenly you break through on an underground city. You find some other thing altogether that you didn't know you were after. And the little story, though, I can tell you about it. A fellow called Featherston, Don Featherston, was making a movie in 1990 called The Daylight Moon, which is about me and the family and poetry and all that. And he said that they were going to film the man weeping in Martin Place, you know, the absolutely ordinary rainbow. And I said, you can't film that. I said, it's not within the range of the camera, you can't get it. And he said, oh, I've got to try. And I said, okay, you're up on your head bed. And they went one Sunday morning. They figured they'd go there when nobody else was using Martin Place. They'd have their own crowd and their own weeping man, the lot. They went at 6 in the morning, midsummer. And beautifully empty Martin Place, their own crowd, weeper, the lot. Just got started weeping, and a man came walking across Martin Place, saw them, turned at an angle of 45 degrees, came across to the crowd, went straight through it, like a helicopter, you know, sort of pushing them to one side, and said, you miserable lot of bastards, he said, fancy standing here watching a man cry, you think it's a bloody spectacle. and promptly comforted the weeping man and ruined the whole shoot and went on his way. Don told me this, and I said, yeah, I told you you couldn't film that. It's not in the Ranger film. Oh, sorry.
It's about the same poem, the perfectly ordinary rainbow. You mentioned the gift of grieving. The line, there's something to flash back into that.
The gift of weeping, yeah. A lot of people find it hard, you know, to open up and cry. Women were always allowed it rather a lot more than men, but I think I might have legitimised it a bit with that poem. I think there was a good bit more male weeping after that. I think Bob Hawke was empowered to weep. Would have done him no harm. Weeping never does you much harm. I think it's a very salutary operation. And these might have been people who found it hard to let go, I don't know, to loosen up and weep. On the other hand, they might have just been groupies. Some people will cry for anything, you know. If it's crying time, they'll cry. And so I don't know. Awful lot in that poem, I don't know. It's I was, you know, just pointing to various phenomena in the crowd, as well as to the man. And a fellow once said the best article about it was by one Harry Heseltine. He said, it's interesting to note that the poem is written from the point of view of the crowd and not of the weeping man himself. And perhaps this is an Australian characteristic. And I thought, oh dear, yes. Oh dear, yes, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I didn't have to think of that to write the poem, but I thought, yeah. And I thought a good bit more of it later. You know, that Australia is a very collective culture. It doesn't really like individuals that much, you know. And I think that's getting more so too. But it's been on, that one followed me around, you know. Yeah.
Do you think it's necessary to have a nervous breakdown before you can write?
I don't know if it comes with the job description or not, but I didn't know I was having one. That was the silly part of it. I gradually drifted, around late in 1960, I drifted out of real life, you know. I kind of got rid of all my stuff. I sold all my books and my typewriter and everything and lived rough on the streets and drifted around Australia, hitchhiked. Survived up till about the middle of 62, and then suddenly, click, it was over. As if whatever it had been, took that long to work its way through. And then I was released back into ordinary life, and promptly got married, went to Canberra, got a job and that sort of thing. It came on me again in 1988, and I came down with a big, savage, bad, depressive breakdown, and that one hurt. The first one, oddly enough, was strange, affectless kind of floaty feeling. There was no pain in it. The second one was all pain. It was just made out. I don't know whether you have to have a nervous breakdown or be a bit mad to write, but you do have to be a bit visionary. The reason is that poetry is, like any of the arts, is compounded out of dream and daylight reason, logic, you know, daylight thinking, and the body, you know, the sense of the somatic dimension, the body. And those three have all got to be present at once. There's got to be a sense of dance, a sense of dream, and a sense of thinking in a work of art for it to be complete. And that's the trick, essential trick that you have to master. And if it takes, if that sometimes has its result a depressive breakdown or something, so be it. You know, you've got to take it. An awful lot of artists do have nervous breakdowns, I can tell you that, but not all. And another sad thing is that schizophrenics never produce art. It's depressives who do art, it's not schizophrenics. Ma'am?
There's what proportion of weeping for joy as opposed to weeping for misery or sadness?
I have to do the Weeping for Joy poem, won't I? Yeah. What proportion of it? I think there's Weeping for Joy. I come from that Australian old stoic men's culture that didn't go in for Weeping for Joy either, you know. Yeah, I'll take that one under advisement. I can't tell you much about it except in a poem. Yeah.
Poetry sort of function,
Would you speak up just a touch?
poetry, can you function like prayer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's the main form of prayer I know, in fact. One of the... I suppose I'm so mean and opportunistic, I'd want to write it down every time, you know. You wouldn't want to waste a prayer without making a poem out of it. But it's a guarantor of truthfulness. You can't lie in a poem, I find. You can't poe a liar, I said in another poem. Huckleberry Finn, which is a really great book, Huckleberry says, you can't pray a liar. I found that out. Years later I thought, yeah, you can't poe one either. And so if you want to examine something in your life, a great way to do it is to try and write the poem of it, because that'll tend to, if it works as a poem, it'll boil off the bullshit, you know. Yeah.
You sometimes feel it's not you talking. I'm thinking of the book's Conversation with God, where he says, he starts writing and all these words come out.
Yeah. Like automatic writing, yeah, that can be delusive, of course. It's risky stuff. I mean, if it happened to you, you wouldn't resist it, but you'd look at it afterwards in the cool light of dawn and you'd say, was this the actual first member of the Trinity talking, or was it babble from lower down? You know. But I mean, even in the Bible, you can see parts that are really inspired and parts that are just sort of business, you know. And parts that I think are froth-mouthed raving. But I mean, I remember that the Council of, I think Chalcedony it was, the Book of Revelations got in by one vote. There's wonderful writing in the Book of Revelations, but there is also froth-mouthed raving. You know, it's done an immense amount of harm, that book, I think, because it appeals so ineluctably to the unbalanced. But I wouldn't resist a direct message. It's just that I'd be very careful. I think the church is partly there to tell you whether what you're getting is trustworthy or not. You know.
With that poem about Newcastle, I think I read something one time that you said you could feel a poem about Newcastle coming on.
Yeah.
You needed to go there.
To find the words, yeah. Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, it was a pressure. It does sometimes happen that way. Not every time, but I knew the poem was there. And, I must have known it for a couple of years. I thought, if ever I go to Newcastle and can spend a few days, a week or two, around the east end of Newcastle, I know there's a poem waiting there for me. And, you know, knowing there's a letter of post or a stand. And I was offered a writership in Res at University of Newcastle, and I thought, yeah, I'll go and get that poem. So I stayed deliberately in a motel down the east end of Newcastle, what had been the old Terminus Hotel, right next to Jerry's Fish Cafe, which is the first exotic place away from home I ever remembered. I was three and a half years old when I first went to Newcastle, and that was the first romantic kind of sit-down eatery I could recall from my babyhood. And that's where I saw these strange ladies in the company of soldiers and sailors. Goggle-eyed, fascinated. My mother sort of a bit disapproving of these ladies. It was all phenomena to me. It was fascinating. But yeah, I went there and it came on as a tune. It started dum 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 dum, and the words just started to flow that way. And they come in various ways, but yeah, Caroline.
I'd just like to say thank you, I think, because, you know, you talk about you yourself not entirely knowing about the absolute, the ordinary rainbow.
Oh, no, yeah. Often you don't.
So many people love that poem and they can't exactly say why either.
No, they can't. I think they like it partly because it's the first one I read at the reading and it's the one they remember, you know. they get swamped by all the other ones later, but they remember that one. That was the first one they had.
You're right about things that I know that I can't put into words. It's like you dream what I dream, and you dream my reality or parts of it into words, and I can't even understand everything that you write. But there's something about reading it that is wonderful for me.
Oh, no, thank you.
And I really thank you.
If it all made sense, it would only be prose, wouldn't it? If it all was perfectly clear at one read, you know. It's got to resist you, and you know, things that you come back for and you notice, I didn't see that. Yeah. I do that too. I come back and I think, I didn't know I wrote that.
You said you were an only child.
Yeah.
Do you think that in part led you to becoming a poet?
Oh yeah. I think we're all only children. Some of us have brothers and sisters, but in a deep way, we're only children. We are solitaries in poetry. It's very much a solitary art. I never would have been any good at making movies or radio or being in the theatre or any of those collaborative sort of cooperative arts. I like to run my own show, and my own show is a piece of paper. You know. And and also I was isolated up there in the bush. It wasn't that remote in a way, and yet, or it wasn't that far from civilization, and yet it was very remote. It was just back in the hills. It was behind the Pacific Highway and into the hills, and a lot of people don't believe that Australia extends very far in from the coast at all. You know. So most of my contacts up to the age of 9 when I went to school, because I only went to school for 7 years all up, were with animals and plants and with the weather and that sort of thing, which are good company. They truly are good company. And I am, as I say in that poem, alone at heart, you know, one of those people. A bit autistic too. Ma'am.
You mentioned Revelation. Are there books or particular books or chapters in the Bible that you like more than others?
I tend to be a complete fan of the Gospels. There's not a part of the Gospels I don't like. Above all things, the Gospels. And then, of course, I'd go for... I love Genesis. I always did, you know, because I come from the Free Presbyterian world. I'm actually a convert. I'm not one of your real Catholics. I was a convert at the age of... I joined up in 1964. I must have been 25 at that stage. I'd really joined when I heard of it when I was 18. You know, I again counted the church and I thought, yeah, that's true. That's right. That suits me. That fits me. Well, the church I came from was deeply disembodied. It was all in your head. It was Calvinism and predestinarian too. Wouldn't have a bar of that, but I didn't know where else to look. We got one thing. If we had nothing else, we had a deep immersion in the Bible. And I read the book, every bit of it. I even read the begats. I even read the fine print of the regulations about taking out the sciatic nerve of the beef when you're without which it won't be kosher. You know, all those. Jewish dietary laws, the whole thing, and in its own strange ways, it's many, many books. The Bible. It's some of them are completely unreal and strange, and to us in the modern world, you know, things about kosher food and all that sort of thing, and yet others are utterly piercing and timeless. And you never know where you're going to stumble on the utterly piercing, timeless thing in the Bible. So I don't fear the Old Testament the way that Catholics do. Yeah. Oh, I knew somebody had mentioned Job. Job is a wonderful book, yeah. Some people say it's the first novel. In some ways it is too, although it has only one named character. No, fascinating, beautifully written too. It's a lovely composition. The one thing about the Jewish Bible I love the Old Testament is the way that things are said in parallels with each other. Particularly in the book of Psalms, where it really comes to the surface. Also in the book of the Song of Solomon. A thing is said and then it is elaborated slightly differently. And a fellow described it the other day, Barry Hill, described it as the lines lie together like lovers with their arms over each other. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I don't know who was first over here, but... So.
I wonder if I could ask you to comment on two statements that you made that really just hit me between the eyes. That Australia is a very collective culture. And the statement you've just recently made that we are all only children.
Well...
And
No, what I meant was all we artists are only children, and particularly us poets are only children. But I guess, there is something. You see, I don't really know what it's like to have brothers and sisters anyway. I mean, our eldest two were getting stuck into each other in a big battle one day, and I tried to intervene, and they said, "Dad, you don't know anything about brothers and sisters and their quarrels, you know." Butt out, they said. I said, "Yeah, you're right, I don't." I haven't the foggiest idea. But no, I would say that it's artists who are only children. Yeah.
Have you ever had the desire to sit by Ayers Rock and write?
I'm sorry, what?
Have you ever had the desire to sit by Ayers Rock and write?
I've never been to Ayers Rock. Never been to Ayers Rock. I did write a poem called Inside Ayers Rock, but that's about the one the Leyland brothers built on the Pacific Highway up there, north of between Raymond Terrace and Bulladila. I read that one sometimes, and people sort of goggle at me. And a woman said in England, "But I've just come back from Australia. I was at Ayers Rock. It's not hollow." And I said, "Didn't you notice that it was made out of rust?" I said, "Didn't you go bong bong on the front?" And her husband sitting there with a big grin on his face. But no, I've never been to Ayers Rock, the real one. I would be a bit afraid to go. It's I tend to avoid places that are where you've got to be reverential. You know? It's a tremendously reverential sort of thing. We sort of approach the Aborigines now on our knees, on the tiptoes of our knees, and I can't quite take the silly grin off my face when that's on. When people are being terribly reverential, I get a silly grin on my face. So I tend to keep away from those occasions. So, I think there was somebody up there behind you who didn't have your question before, ma'am. Yeah.
I think I heard you hinting before that you see a more Christian practice in the post-Christian era than you saw before. Is that right?
Yeah, that's just a little observation in passing. Yeah, there are some things that were allowed in old times that are not allowed now, and the impulse for which comes from Christianity. You know, they just arrived a bit late. I don't think Christianity's going away either. I don't think it's the post-Christian era at all. I think that's endless propaganda that is preached in the media. The only use the media seems to have for Catholicism is as a source of stories about pedophilia and scandal. You know, but I think it's sort of like a live burial. You know, you find yourself having dirt heaped upon you, and the spade banged in, and you're told you're dead and gone. But I've got a bit of an instinct about that. If the church had been absolutely triumphant and ruling the world, I might not have joined it. I tend to go for things that are embattled rather than things that are right on top and triumphant. You know. I read a poem somewhere which says the proper study of mankind is weakness. If a thing weren't weak, how would we know to join it? You know. So, ma'am.
You love the Gospels and the.
Yeah.
Do you feel that our language has been a block, that we've mispresented the church in many ways to the language is now?
When I first joined the church, it was within a few months of it changing over from Latin to English.
Yeah, I mean, communicating what we really are on about.
Yes.
You know?
It's also a matter of the willingness of others to listen. There is a deep unwillingness to listen amongst men, and always was. You mean how can you reinvent it and make it fresh again?
I think some of the hymns have really got whiskers on them, and some of them, you know.
Some of the modern hymns are a bit of a hole in the air, aren't they?
Some of the old ones,
yeah.
you know.
There are good ones, though. I mean, Jim McCauley's ones, Big Trouble. Yeah, there are good modern hymns.
How do we present with...
You sing them in church, and people who don't commit to church don't hear them. They're not on the regular radio. That's one thing. How did I get the gift of faith? I think I was just given it. I think we were all given it. It's not particularly dramatic, you know, you just find it in yourself there. And it just seemed to suit me as soon as I heard of it. I'll tell you how it happened, it was odd. I was walking up from Redfern Station one day with a mate of mine called Walter Davis, who I'd only just met. He came from Birrong out in the west of Sydney, and we were yarning about this, that and the other. We'd, you know, just as you do when you first meet up with somebody, you're covering all the subjects, and he happened to reach religion, and he said, "Oh, I'm Catholic." He said, "That doesn't make a difference to you, does it?" Why? I said, well, why would it make a difference? And that was settled, you know, that I wasn't prejudiced against Catholics. It was awfully widespread in those days to be prejudiced against Catholics. My mother couldn't stand them. My father deeply disapproved of Catholicism. When I joined the church, he never actually mentioned it. For the next 40 years, he never mentioned it. It was too awful a thing to raise in conversation. There was a shadow of Belfast hung over Australian life, and it's not completely gone. But it's a lot less now.
Yes, more like it, yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe. Ma'am.
Steve asked you about what you mean by Australia as a collective.
Yeah, we kind of fell over that question. I didn't answer it before. Just something I feel that I call it dingo culture sometimes. Australians, when they stick their necks out, find they haven't usually got somebody backing them up. The people go quiet and let them cop it. An individual, Pauline Hanson was one example, but there are many. I wrote about it once, how the media will take, particularly some woman, and they'll first sniff around and see if she's got any protection, and if nobody stands up and says, hey, leave her alone, they will pitch into her with every kind of resource of ridicule and viciousness that can be manufactured, and each day out of their inventiveness they'll invent new stuff, and she'll be pilloried and torn to pieces. And this is a warning to the others, don't stick your head out, you know. And of course, nobody in our culture, and I am deeply ashamed of it, I think Australia is a damnable culture for this. They will not stand up and defend someone who's set upon. So I always stick my neck out, even if I don't entirely approve of it. I stuck my neck out for Helen Darville, who was a bit of a flake in some ways, but a very brilliant girl as well. And but I'm the mug who'll speak up as a rule, and I think more people should. But you look round in Australia for support, and it's not there. They've run off. And I think in the 19th century there was a battle between the collective and the individual, and the individual lost. One of the ways individuality was expressed was through the bushrangers, and they lost. What worked for working people was collective bargaining, you know, unions and getting together, which is perfectly fine, and it worked beautifully, and it worked before it worked anywhere else in the world. It's a great tradition. By 1851 they had the 8-hour day in Melbourne in the Quarrymen's Union, and union movement was a great and wonderful success, and they got the idea that anything you want you've got to get collectively, and that only sticking together works, but also sticking together makes people conform. And I've even smelt bits of it in Catholicism sometimes, you know, the Catholic tribe. And wherever I smell a tribe who are enforcing a silence upon and squashing down an individual, my hackles go up. That's only child stuff again, I suppose. You know, you're trained in individuality, and you don't trust being policed by tribes and collectives. You know, I don't know whether that's perverse of me or not. Yeah.
Sounds really interesting when you said that after you've been through your coma, you wrote differently, and also when you spoke about writing a poem after your mother died.
Yeah.
And it made me think that we go through stages.
Yeah.
We do view beauty differently. We don't realise that those things we're going through, like after you have a baby, all of a sudden.
Yeah. Yep, it's all different, I'm told, after a baby, yeah.
If someone close to you dies, all of a sudden you sort of see everything so much more clearly.
Yeah, right, what do they call them, passages, or... yeah. Oh yeah, they if you're a poet, they'll bring poems out of you as a general thing too. I've read quite a lot of good poems about childbirth. My favourite of all was one that I got from Rosemary Dobson. I put it in the Oxford Book of Australian Verse, and it starts off 3 times to the world's end I went, talking about 3 children she had, you know, going out to the very edge of death and coming back with somebody that she met there, you know. And Rosemary's a very quiet, demure, sort of dignified lady, and she asked me, because nobody had ever noticed this poem before, you know, it had never been one of her famous poems, and she said, why did you use that one? And I said, because it's the only way I could learn about that experience. You told it in a way that completely convinced me. And she smiled a little quiet Rosemary Dobson smile, and that, you know, and I think was gratified. Yeah. Right.
Translating your idea of Australia being a collective culture, how does that impact on our spirituality, do you feel?
It'd be worth thinking about, wouldn't it? I haven't thought that side of it through at all yet. I suppose I'm a living example of it. Poetry being a solitary occupation anyway. That all my spirituality is individual rather than collective.
But if we have a culture of putting down people who speak down, do you think that then translates into our spirituality?
Which might be more conformist than it may well be. It may well be. Australian poetry's been very collectivist in the last generation, and tended to put down the individual, and have a line on things. And it does energise you. If you don't like that, you write all the harder because of it. But we might be tramping on individual intimations. Right now there's a kind of an agenda, a set of received beliefs on everything in Australia, and you're supposed to tick them off, because otherwise you'll be pulled up all the time, and your time wasted and your energy wasted in explaining your position if it's different from the regular one. So it becomes easier to relax into, all right, I take the standard line on this, that, and the other to save time, to save energy, and you end up. You think I'll live my life in private, and I'll just conform to the agenda with my mouth, and you find there's no you. There is no space left where you individually exist. The agenda has taken up everything. That's why I tend to avoid things like, say, going to Ayers Rock, because that's an agenda item. Yeah. Oh, the chap up there in the back, but I'll remember you. So.
An agenda item for many is the temper episode and all the things connected with that.
Yeah.
Fairly simple of a particular part of our current collectivism.
Yeah.
Have you been tempted to write about that or something else?
No, I'm on both sides of a lot of things. I know about refugees. I'm married to a refo. She calls herself a refo because it's kind of a humorous way of referring to how they were referred to in the late 40s, early 50s when they came, migrants. Now, many subjects, of course, it's not that I'd have an opinion different from or wildly in opposition to the agenda. It's just that it's not that, what I always say to myself, it's not that simple. It's got more sides than one. Not everybody on that ship is a paladin of virtue. Not everybody stopping them is a monster. There are all sorts of complex human dynamics involved, and I'd have to know a lot more about it too. And I know a lot of Jewish folk, and you won't get too much approval from them of any idea of stopping refugees, because they went through that experience of desperately being refugees and needing refuge. The right to be many-minded is something I'm talking about, I suppose. The right to thinking on the one hand and on the other hand. I guess in some ways spiritually I'm a Libra, on the one hand and on the other hand and on the third hand and on the fourth hand, and weighing it all. Ma'am? I'm sorry?
Continuing on.
Yes.
Pushing back communication.
Yeah.
Is that stronger in Australia, do you think, than in other countries?
Are people more free in other countries to be individuals?
Yes.
I wonder. Yeah, I don't know another culture deeply enough to know. The English say they are, but I wonder if it's above a certain class line and not below a certain class line. And I find the individuals sometimes in England who are supposed to be individuals are really very obedient to certain class beliefs that they're holding. Now the individual has to work at it, I think. And in Australia it's made just a bit harder by a lot of what I call the schoolyard atmosphere. The constant hectoring to be in it, mate, to agree with everybody else. Don't make waves. Don't be like that. It's lack of a cup of tea, I think. It's sometimes.
I'll be back in the lane before I try to be back about past. Thank you.
Well, this is Les Murray, Tape 2, Aquinas Academy Summer School, January 2002.
Ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen, let us begin our second session with Les.
Thank you very much. I noticed most of you came back. This session will be a bit harder than last time because I've got to expound a book to you that you haven't read, called Freddie Neptune, the verse novel. One or two might have read it, but it's quite a big thing. And there's a picture on the front of a fellow lifting a ship. Now, Freddie Neptune, his real name is Friedrich Bircher, Freddie Bircher. He comes from outside of Dungog, born in 1895, and he goes to sea rather than be a farmer. He grows up on a farm, bilingual. His parents were German speakers. There were a lot of German-speaking Australian country folk in those days, and rather than go on into farming, he goes to sea. And he works never on sailing ships, but on steamers. 1914 comes along, and he happens to be on a German-speaking ship in Messina, in Sicily, and they're called upon to shove coal into two German battleships very quickly. The German battleships are being sent to the Turks as a way of buying their alliance against Britain and France and so on in the war has broken out. These two ships were sent, they're called Goeben and Breslau, and they were sent to Constantinople, the capital of Turkey, to bring the Turks in against what would they call themselves, the Western Allies or something, and the Allies. The idea was to block the Dardanelles, to keep Russia from getting her trade in and out of warm Black Sea ports. And the idea was to bring down the Russian economy and bring Russia to collapse. And it was one of the factors that did bring Russia down. So Fred, coaling this ship, is at the end of the shift when they're working on this, he goes to sleep on the coal and wakes up at sea and finds himself an Australian citizen, British subject, on a German ship in the beginning of the First World War. What do you do, you know? He says that he is from the South Seas, German colonies in the South Seas, finds himself in the Kaiser's Navy. I'll read you this beginning part of the poem. It's all written in an old-fashioned Australian speech, basically my father's language, the language of that era, the first half of the 20th century. But it's a bilingual person speaking, so you can hear German underneath it some of the time. You know, he's translating his Germanness, his German speak. It means that during the 20th century he can move back and forth across the most fraught frontier of all, between the German-speaking world and the English-speaking world. And Fred is not an educated man. He's an intelligent, observant man, but not a person of book learning. So I'll just read you these first couple of pages as to what happens, and which sets the story which is to follow. That was sausage day on our farm outside Dungog. There's my father, Reinhard Bircher, my mother, Agnes. There's brother Frank, who died of the brain burn, meningitis. There I am, having my turn at the mincer. Cooked meat with parsley and salt, winding out smooth as gruel for the Weisswurst. Here's me riding bareback in the sweater I wore to sea first. I never learned the old top ropes. I was always in steam. Less capstan, less climbing, more restowing cargo, which could be hard and slow as farming. But to say, why, this is Valparaiso, or I'm in Singapore and know my way about, takes a long time to get stale. My German had got me a job out of New York on a Hansa freighter, the Orbitz. That's how we came to be cooking alive that August in Messina, pluming Undertaker City. The first I heard that the war had really come was a black-faced officer with a target and a church on his cap, directing sailors to rip our decks up for the coal below. I turned out of my hammock to fight them, and our bosun chucked me a shovel. We're coaling that battle cruiser there, the English are after it. It was like one great bushfire at work, the whole harbour under smoke and brown dust, slings light as big crane buckets, slopping man-killing rocky lumps before they poured. I was sent across to the warship. Up on deck, the band was sweating, pumping Umpapa and Hayrasa to us below to encourage our mad shoveling. A man dropped dead beside me. His face hit the bulkhead, bong, as he fell. So when the ship's only clean man came and nodded enough, with his high matters expression, a lot of us sprawled asleep right on the coal. When I woke up, we were steaming full ahead at sea. Later we heard how the one British admiral sent after us had been wireless to steam the long way around Sicily, and the other one, racing down the Adriatic at squib facing our big guns. But I was thinking more about being shot for a spy if I protested or explained myself. So I was off the Orpits would be enough, a colonial from the South Sea. All servicemen are like officers now, but the empires could be pretty approximate then with a lower deck. "You're German," said the chief. "I'm short two that dropped dead. Wear this rig. Come to attention, soap," to any officer, "and enjoy the Kaiser's dumpling. The warship is a lot less hard to graft than a freighter." I got used, like the rest, to being called a sow lump, a carrion, a waxer, and soon we were sailing in between dry hills to a city of bulbs and spikes, Constantinople, where men goose each other and eat off forges in the street. Soon after, the Kaiser came on board with crowds of heel clickers. He wore a resentful, snobby look, electric whiskers in his pink grandpa face, and a helmet like a finial off a terrace house. We'd to change our caps, he said, and put on fezzes. We were now the Turkish Navy. Enver Pasha had a hemorrhoid look on him at that time. All the women we Turk matlows met we were led to by the touts. I was ashamed and shy. I was always round all that. The tired anger in it behind the sticky smiles, the contempt as they stooped over to give you eyefuls. All I wanted was a girlfriend. And then with no Turk orders, our admiral took us to Odessa, and I found myself passing up big silk bags to the gun crews to make thunderclaps that rang the iron ball the earth around. Now Turkey was in and Russia's last trade lifeline blocked, so she would rot. It was all we'd come to do, I worked out later. We idled and dressed ship around the city and the Black Sea, playing skat, eating goulash. When Gallipoli came, I thought, I'll desert if I have to fight Australians. But instead, my mates and I, on shore leave up by Trabzon, at last saw women with their faces unwrapped in the open. They were huddling, terrified, crying, crossing themselves, in the middle of men, all yelling. Their big loose dresses were sopping, kerosene, you could smell it. The men were prancing, feeling them, poking at them to dance. Then poof, they were alight, the women, dark wicks to big orange flames, whooping and shrieking. If we'd had rifles there, we'd have massacred those bastards. We had only fists and boots. One woman did cuddle a man, he went up screaming too. We would have been killed but for a patrol from the ship. Back on board, within days, I found out I had leprosy. I just curled up on my hammock like a burnt thing myself and turned my back. The POs couldn't scream me back to work. "Sour fella, all you've got's influenza, acute lazy-itis." When the watch officer saw my white numb places, he got very serious and discovered I was a stray. The chief lost his rank over it. I was put ashore quick. Now, Fred lies around in Constantinople thinking he's got leprosy and sort of begging on the streets. What he has seen has been an opening day in the great massacre of the Armenian people, the Turks, on the 25th of April 1915. The Armenians remember that day differently from us. That was the day that the second great Turkish attack on the Armenians came. That was what they call the Second Armenian Genocide. Probably something like 1.5 million people were massacred during the next 3 years under the cover of World War I. The Armenian people, who apparently have never been more than 4 million of them in the world, about half of them disappeared, mostly by death from exposure, hunger, random shooting, bashing, that sort of thing. And it was the first of the 20th century's great genocides, and it was Hitler's model. He said later, "Of course we can solve the Jewish question. Who remembers the Armenians?" One of the motives for the Second World War, quite likely, was to provide cover in the same way for a genocide. So it was a ghastly model for what was to come, and it was a ghastly thing in itself. Fred, observing it, gets to what looks like leprosy, and then he's picked up by his sailor mates and set off to Berlin on a German Navy warrant, and ends up in a leprosarium in Germany, out of which he escapes. Gets through to Holland, which is a neutral country, and gets onto a ship. He has this belief if he can get home to Australia, he'll be all right. And his leprosy drops away. All the symptoms of leprosy disappear. But what he's left with is a total lack of body sensation. His skin doesn't register pain or pleasure. He gradually realises that his body is looking after itself, unconsciously. His unconscious is looking after him perfectly well. So he doesn't accidentally burn to death without noticing it. It's just that, as he says, my body feels but it doesn't tell me. And so as far as he's concerned, he's living in a world of no sense of touch. And it's a very complex sort of notion, I suppose, and the story is
is dense without being highly intellectualised. It's a lot of things happen for the next 33 years while he has this condition upon him. Occasionally it goes away, partly or completely, and then it comes back upon him. He's always terrified it's going to come back, and he's terrified that he'll do something which will bring it back on him. And yet you notice as you go through, as Fred never does, that whenever it comes back on him, it's from some awful thing that some other person has done. It's a moral. It's a kind of moral, ethical kind of maiming that Fred suffers from. It has its ambiguities, of course. It makes him very strong. He can lift enormous weights and things, and he can make his living at times in his life from being an acrobat and lifter of weights, various things. I'll read you a couple of other sections from it. He's been out in the Atlantic. He's tried to get through the Panama Canal. He never can get a ship going the right way, and he finally gets torpedoed, but picked up and gets a job on a freighter that's supposed to be going to Perth. And marvellous, he's going through the Suez Canal. He's going to get home, and the thing, the propeller fouls some wire in the ocean and sheds its the propeller's wrecked, and they put him to Alexandria, where he meets up with people he knows in the AIF, and goes to work for somebody you will see. And would have got there, but for a wire hawser that sheared the propeller off Alexandria. The company paid us, and I started trudging around the offices in glare that made every shade an island, jammed with poor blowfly kids. Back sheesh, hey Johnny! Feet on their shoulders or blind, and with even riper sores than I'd seen layered on with lamb fat and dye powder before dawn in Istanbul. Pussing pits to last for days. There were soldiers everywhere, peeling in the sun and taking their whippy swagger sticks to the beggars. I dare say Egypt was Britain's Constantinople, but not one where they had to behave. Any German laying a stick about a Turk would have died. I was sitting on a bollard watching the Nile stain the sea when I heard Australian voices. Hey, Fred! Freddie Butcher! It's you old bugger! And shaking hands all round. The Rumbles boy from home, two of the Mudfords from Gloucester, some of the Rills. I knew the lot of them. How are you? Where have you been? What's the news from home? How are my people? There was just a little hitch there. Oh, they're good. Or were when we left, back 3 years ago. So you're still a sailor, sly bugger. Seen any of the war? Man, can't blame you, steering clear. But I went back to it. Last letter I had from home was Easter 1914. They were dragging me away. Come down to Cairo with us. Beer by the bucketful. Heliopolis. Geebung Polo Club. I didn't follow any of it, but we were on this train with no glass in the windows and a bottle in my hand, and soldiers outside stoning shops or careering on camels or hanging upside down from water pipes, and men running in nightshirts offering them tea. It was all Merry Hill, that Egypt. Next, I knew we were in palatial great stables at a racecourse. Too good for the horses. They seemed to be in big holding yards all round with sunscreens of palm on trellises out over them. I was dizzy with home talk and home feelings after so long. Every whip the cat and ryebuck the boys said was home. Their saddle soap was home. Their snake yarns and jokes and tins of champion ruby. Home was the easy stuff to talk about too. They were full of the war, dead mates, the funny bits. I had to bite my tongue. When they talked of Gallipoli, I couldn't really say I'd waited for them in Constantinople, that I'd got there as they hadn't and seen the battle's results. I finally did say I'd been there once. On a ship. What's she like? We lost a lot of blokes heading there. Oh, a decent city on the outside. Sailors don't get indoors much in places. What is this place, I asked. It's the Remount Centre. We come down here for horses and take them back up the line. Banjo Patterson runs it. I hiccuped on my beer. Banjo? Major Patterson. All the cracks are gathered to this rate, says the younger Mudford, laughing. We're off back Wednesday with a mob up to Palestine. Next day we were in the bazaar. Hey, Johnny, and when we got back, my money belt was gone. Complete ruin. I hadn't felt it. Must have used a razor, said one of us. Mongrel bastards. Oh, you got to remember, said the youngest Ralph, these people don't like us. They're kept 2 grades below a private and 1 below his dog. Robbing us would be revenge. It'd be a year's fees for 50 of them, that roll you had. Don't cut the saint on me, I snarled, or I'll dong you. There was a lot in it, though. I'm broke then, I said. You'll have to ask Banjo for a job. You mean enlist? A lot have. I'm a sailor, not a soldier. You could see Jerusalem. And anywhere else they send me. And get shot there. They're not exactly suiting me on. Well, I don't give speeches. I can't enlist. You mean you won't shoot Germans? No, nor Australians. Each man was looking at the ground. Like some of yous in that. One of them finally said, you get up early and wake up late in the army. This was Banjo. For all that uniform and copper strap over one shoulder, he had more the way about him of a bush town solicitor. Well-made small man, still trim. As we walked through the yards, there was this grunting, half-broken pig squealing just away. We're buying up native horses. Half of them are in tyres and have to be gilded. It's sad, but it's army regulations. Stallions aren't free like us men to refuse their passions, and we want them for ours, not theirs. More sense than us, sir. You could be right, young Rumble. And yeah, so he breaks in a horse for Banjo at that point, and he's taken on as a worker there. And later on, he's talking to Banjo about. He mentions Banjo's poetry, and Banjo says, "I have a feeling." Now, my work, my poems, of course, maybe no more than a long farewell to the horse. After the war, he finally gets back to the Hunter Valley only after the First World War is over. He walks into a world of people with masks over their faces to the great 1919 flu, and goes up to his old farm and finds that there's another family living there. And I'll read you that bit about his coming home. Coming home, I walked into a masquerade. All the people in Newcastle, all on the train, wore these face masks of white cotton gauze, some dirtied with tobacco and words. I had to too. So there I am, riding in a dog box through Maitland, stewing in that January heat, on through Patterson, between the courthouse and the tall church, above the creek flats, and all the way so nervous I'm brewing and letting gas like a great beer bottle as I look forward to home. Then we're at Dungog, all white-whiskered women, muzzled kids and handkerchief desperados, scared the black flu might strike them. Some confused even their families, and people singing out, "Mum, here I am." But my family, they aren't there. I'd have known them masked head to foot. But maybe it was nothing. The muscular cleared hills looked bright, smaller but still home. I'd just hoof it out to the farm and arrived before my telegram. "Freddie! Fred Beecher!" It was a schoolmate of mine, half whispering through his rag like a conspirator. "You back, how are you?" I shook hands. It made him nervous. He kept his voice down like that and I didn't know why. "How you been, Arthur?" I started and he cut in. "Watch out. The Pages, they lost 2 boys in the war." The Pages from Main Creek, they never said a cross word to me in all the years, but I realise now that I've been braced for one. I got no more warnings or welcomes walking up Dowling Street and out to the farm. The body sweated hard, but I was cool all over, hanging from my head and listening to the boots crunch gravel, going home. I'd be there for dinner. Dad would grin his, "No, you are." Mother might wipe a tear with her apron, handshakes, hugs, kisses, all that. You see what a flat I was? There was the creek paddock, there were the sheds, the grapevine wrapped half round the house. There were kids there. Oh, well, visitors, I thought. They looked at me, dirty-faced, and when I sang out, "G'day," they rang like bandicoots to cover straight up under the house. I started seeing changes around and untidiness. Then out comes a man, not my dad, but acting the boss. "G'day," he says, not smiling. "G'day. What can I do for you?" "Well, I live here, or my family do, and where are they?" "Gone," he spits out. "Where all you Hun bastards belong." I was clean hopeless. King hit from inside. I stood with my mouth open there. His woman came out and looked frightened at the door. "You got it through your head," he snapped. "You're out. Get off the place before I sell the dogs on you." And he hitched his trousers up. I remember he hitched his strides. The pole barn, the pepper tree, the trenched tracks down to the cattle crossing. He's built. I must have wandered round for hours. I can't remember. I was soaking wet. I woke. The stars were out. Mosquitoes were singing their good luck in finding me. I went back to the town and there weren't many about. "Where's your flu mask, butcher?" I heard a fellow say. Another, "Sorry about your poor father." "No, it's decent." Who they were, I don't know. I was a ghost. This woman was pushing half a man in a wheelchair and he smelt obnoxious. "You haven't cooked yourself again, dear Mother of Jesus." And he had this awful apology look on his face forever as she wheeled him in his uniform. I woke up next day in a paddock outside town and drifted in again. I had to know, but who did I dare ask? I kept waiting to be told. "Back from the war, Fred? That right you was with Banjo Patterson?" The first cheerful, normal voice. It was one of the matrons I'd been to school with. We yarned and bit by bit I learned it all. Dad had died near around when I dreamed it. Mother had sold the farm. Post office might know her address now. A buggerable business. This one was dead, that one crippled. The district's half buggered. That many wills been tore up. It'll never be the old Skylark and young place it was. wives and girls in black everywhere, but the old ones will see they keep mourning. I did try the post office, caused a big silence and got nothing. Except I did learn something. A woman I knew got a telegram while I was there and wouldn't open it. Had to have it opened. I only understood a while after. Later I was over the bridge and a cart came by, painted and decorated T.E. Lauer, General Carrier, and that was Ted Lauer. Wie geht's denn, Theo? I asked. And he went, "Green, not much of that Deutsch left in me." Freddie muttered, "You got sense, you'll drop it too." "So, you've been at the war?" "Dodging round it," I replied. But he was in a hurry. "It'll be all better in a year or two," he reckoned, over his shoulder. I was starving. I went to have a feed. I looked such a tramp by this time they made me pay first. Sensible, except they knew me. Had done since I was a kid. "Yeah, but which merchant's navy?" asked somebody out loud and laughed. So, right, I up and walked out of my home district for good. We went back after 20 years. 2012, yeah. I think I can afford to read you one more passage from further on in the book. Utterly different one. He's worked as he worked on the drogas around the Myall Lakes hauling timber. You might not know what drogas are. They're a kind of shallow water vessels that don't go to sea. They're used for working on lakes and rivers. And he worked in a kind of travelling circus. He's been forced to go to America to bring back a criminal who had escaped with a lot of Australian money. Fails. Ends up being there in 1929 when the great crash comes. He's a hobo in America. He's worked in Hollywood. He's been one of the few platonic friends, I suppose, of Marlene Dietrich. Although we must not make the assumption. And he's in Germany. In book 4, he's working for. Been working for Zeppelins in Germany, and he found his mother, by the way, in Newcastle. Finally, working as a pianist in a movie theatre. But then she has remarried and gone back to Germany. She's living in Dresden, in which city she will later be burned alive in the great air raid in 1945. There are more than just one set of women get burnt in this book. Then we went to Dresden, and I got leave to stay and see my mother. That was the most beautiful city I ever saw in the world. You can only get there now by Zeppelin, or else it's some netted building sites out on a great wide floor. Back in 1932, when Hitler was winning Lippe-Detmold, it was narrow and high and carved in walnut stone, shining with glass and money. I took the Folkenstrasse tram past the big brewery to the Persian rug apartment Zeitz had installed my mother in. Coffee and bee-sting cakes, kisses and hugs and tears. "Will you settle now in the fatherland? Will your wife," she'd forgotten Laura's name, "feel at home in this country? How long have you been away? Are you separated from her? Yours it must be a big boy now." It wrung me, it shook me. I dreaded when Zeitz would come home. But who knew? Perhaps he'd be alone. Perhaps being there was enough fatherland for him. Turned out it wasn't. After dinner, when I'd been corrected at 37 years of age for calling him Volkmar, it was now stepfather to me, I got a lecture on the Jews in business, their interest rates, they're promoting each other, their profits from the war, they're selling out Germany. He had this Russian book, but translated into German, that told their entire strategy of capturing world power. In other words, he's got a copy of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And they talk on, and Zeitz is pushing the Nazi line very heavily to Fred, who's not buying it. But he describes bits of it. Sometime after midnight I was hearing about the ancient German lands of Thule far in the north, their cities, the civilization, the great warrior culture, all lost beneath the ice that drove our tribes southward. Someone called Joseph Strigovsky had written it all up, like Zeitz's Jew-hating manual. It all started to sound like a half-smart man's excuse for failure in life. The Bolsheviks, the Nazis, all the movements had that same excuse-making, blaming someone throb in their speechifying voices. But also I thought it might be at last of a young fellow brought up in a world he didn't live in, Germany and Paraguay. At least I was raised unfussy and bush casual to fit where I was. I wondered if he spoke Paraguayan. He was in real estate now. When he'd gone to the office next morning, my mother took me round the sites till my head was full of little gold plaster bums. We ended up drinking coffee on Bruhl Terrace, watching the Elbe unravel knots of light away towards Hamburg. I asked, did she miss home? And she asked where that was. Not surely in that country where she wasted 30 years going from foreign to the enemy. We were alone among them. We had German friends, German relations. You were not there for the worst. We were alone. The relations were alone. Each family, the wives with British husbands were alone. One should live among own people and own ways. My father did think that, and it gave way under him. He thought he belonged there, and he did belong to the hills, but not to the neighbours. That is what killed him. Will it kill me if I don't give up speaking German? I asked, and cold ran over my innards as I said that how much in me was already killed for that reason. She let me answer myself. Split belongings killed war in me, being on any two sides spoils you for all sides. For right against wrong, snapped my mother, for decent against low. I was sad. That was Seats talking. I looked over at the towering clock church with all its tiers of handholds and the cutwaters of the big stone bridge to fellows fishing on the other side. Are those the Anglo-Saxons? I asked Mum. But she let that go by. At last she said to me, you wrote letters to us in German during the war. They were read. They didn't help us. That was the last she said to me, except goodbye stuff. We swapped odd letters after, but that was the last of her voice. She was 58 then. It was 13 years till she burned. Fred, in the first book, had gone up to Palestine with the horses just to be with the mates and to have a look at Jerusalem and so on. And he ended up, what he really wanted to do was go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and get a miracle, get his feeling back. He went to this church, found it hideous, and he said he could easily see why Jesus wouldn't want to stay there, you know. And it is rather awful. But in there he met a man in a black Armenian robe. They have a pointed, hood, who said that says to him that if ever he can pray with a whole heart, he will be free of his condition that very day. What Fred never quite admits to himself for many years is that he both hates his condition and loves it. I mean, it means that he got all sorts of secret freedoms. He can be very strong. He can sleep rough in any weather. He can, he can live inside the fortress of himself and be comfortable in all weathers and climates. And also he knows, as any Australian does, that if you're gifted, you must. Any working person anywhere in the world knows. If you're gifted, the first thing you do with it is not to display it, just to hide it. You know, they know, all working people know the stone opposite of what Jesus said. That is, you don't put you don't let your light shine forth. You hide it under the bushel straight away because you're going to get punished if you don't. And so he manages to live this life pretending to be an ordinary fellow while having this strange cursed gift on him. And he eventually does find a way to pray with a whole heart, and it does lead him. And I'll read you that bit. He's back in Newcastle and with his family, and let's see how much to read. Yes, one of the things he did while he was in Germany, that one of the very first laws the Germans passed, the Nazis passed, was after they came to power in 1933, was a law for the genetic health of the German race, by which all people that they described as defective were to be sterilised, and like mentally and physically handicapped people were to be sterilised. And later, of course, 1939, they began gassing them. They went the whole hog. And but Fred finds a bloke on the street who's got a letter which instructs him to go to a certain clinic to be castrated. And the fellow is very dim mentally and clearly doesn't know what his letter's all about and why he's going to the doctor. And Fred thinks, what can I do with this bloke? You know, I can't let this one go by. So what he does is kidnap him to bring him, manage to secrete him back all the way back to Australia and kind of adopt him. And it's a completely quixotic sort of act, but he couldn't let it happen. And getting him through the war, of course, without being interned and maybe sent back to Germany and so on, is also a theme in the book. But Hans has grown up with the family and become a part of the family. And he's even learned a bit of English. And That Friday evening I had to collect Louise from her music lesson after school. Hans came up with me and got a tennis racket and started hitting a ball into the store space under the building opposite from where I sat to wait. There was a crucifix on the wall near me, and Jesus had his head turned hard to one side as if he was watching just one player in Hans' tennis game. Not Hans, but the dark space that kept returning his shots, mostly skew, so Hans had to chase them. You have to pray with the whole heart, says my inner man to me, and you haven't got one. Can I get one? Forgive the Aborigines. What have I got to forgive? They never hurt me. For being on our conscience. I shook my head and did. Forgiving feels like starting to. But I suppose I feel uneasy around you, I thought to them, and shook my head and started understanding. Hans served and the ball came bounding back like a happy pup. Forgive the Jews, myself said. That one felt miles steep, stone-blocked and black as iron. That's really not mine, the Hitler madness. No, it's not, said myself. It isn't on your head, but it's in your languages. So I started that forgiveness, wincing, asking it as I gave it. When I stopped asking it, cities stopped burning in my mind. My efforts faded and went inwards. I was let rest. And came back to Hans searching under the building for his ball. Then myself said, forgive women. Those burn? All women, it said. Something tore on me like bandage coming off scab and hair, the white tearing off me like linen. And I knew what was coming. Forgive God, myself said. I shuddered at that one. Judging him and sensing life eternal, said myself, are different hearts. You want a single heart to pray. Choose one and drop one. I looked inside them both, and only one of them allowed prayer, so I chose it. And my prayer was prayed and sent already as I chose it. Nothing happened that evening. Next morning I woke under weight. Our bedclothes were on me, warming me to just above the perfect heat I must have been at for 34 years. The bedspread was covered with like caterpillars. The clock was icy, stinging like the dawn. My thighs weren't glassy under my silk hands anymore, but with paws and hairs. Memories stormed back from far to cover over the null time. So fast I had only like that day a pure rediscovery. How water dries and milk dries on. How cold starts at the knees and shoulders where flesh isn't thick. How a kicked toe delays its pain for a second and then pounces. But it was closing over, all my lone secret story. Everything I got turned at once into something I'd got back, except the pains I don't know many boys feel, rheuma and the witch's shot, sciatica, and aches in bones that had gone away still unbroken when I was 20. I learned that week in Love and Swears that the earlier times I'd been back had not been full returns, just ghostly half measures, memory dragging, dreaming flesh at half gravity. Now I was sore and heavy and bogged in chairs. I lifted nothing but my long frame with my wrists. I walked hard stomps. I extended all the way in itch and muscle fist and cloth rub from the head I'd lived in to the feet that had been my far limits. And from the first I knew no counter prayer, no horror, nothing would bring my null body back. It was gone forever. The limelight goes off me with it. We went on living. Joe got married next year, which filled his dimples with grins. Lou went to high school. I backed Norrie when I made extra cash, and some people picked I was different. Not up in your point shoes, Fred, as Ron asked me, getting back into his from the war. Later on we travelled. I paid to sleep. And people died of old age. But there's too much in life, you can't describe it. There's too much in life, you can't describe it. I sure tried in this book. There's an awful lot of detail in there. A lot of history, a lot of sensibility, and it was a wonderful exercise in kind of automatic writing. We were talking about that earlier, about letting something write itself through you. I deliberately allowed the book to write itself and tried not to correct it too much. And wherever I would slip off the authenticity of the story, I'd lose the track of the story, I'd backtrack to where I'd lost it and start again. I knew there was a kind of a thread there to follow, and I would always know when I slipped off it. And so I wrote it out it's in 5 books, and each one took about 3 or 5 months, and then I'd go about 6 months without writing anything. I just let it build up in my head till I was ready to go again. And I didn't know how it ended. I had no idea how it went. I found it by going, and let the story tell itself through me, obviously coming from deeper down in my mind. And Fred is a name that I was almost given in baptism, to my alter ego. And so he's a bilingual German speaker and an odd sort of person who goes, in a way, he goes deeply down that track which opened with the Reformation, you know, when the bread and wine stopped being Jesus and became abstract, you know, just a memorial. When the body got excluded from religion, he goes into the abstract world, and he spends a long time in there, and finally comes back. So that I can't say much more about it. I suppose I can in response to specific questions, but in a general overview, you'd need to read the thing, I think, and it gives me recommending, not entirely from financial gain, that you do so. So what do you want to know about it?
You come from Dungog area?
No, it's not far away, but it's not the same. I didn't want to make it exactly where I come from. But when he's in Australia, he looked to, that's the main one in Australia, he uses a lot of reference to local names, and they are the real names. And I made this rule that, except in the case of Adolf Hitler, every person named in the book, every real person who actually existed, would not get any bad said about them. Only made up people would have bad said about them. And I've got all the, you know, the Macombs and the Sternbecks and every other kind of family around there gets mentioned. He even goes to Miss Wilkes's 100th birthday in the 30s. And so I got a lot of that from old copies of the Dungog newspaper. But that's how country people do talk. They talk in terms, as you know, of families, relationships, networks of their clan. And that's true about white and black country people, because they are not different from each other. They are often related to each other. You know, the big Australian secret. Yeah.
Liz, after a long travel like that, what do we make of the saying that you made before, that you come from around near Dunsborough?
I come from there, but I've been a few other places since. You know, no, it was a distillation of an awful lot of reading and travelling and learning German, and you know, I am fairly bilingual in that language, and real life experience, and trying to, well, it really came to me in that more mysterious way of the man in Martin Place. It stood up in my head and said, "Write me." I didn't know what the story would be, but I knew the story was very important, and it would be a fruitful story to tell. No, I don't even absolutely like gum trees, to tell you. I've got my reservations about them. Like all bushes, I've got reservations about them. You don't have them near your house, for one thing. They burn you to death. They're very good at a slight distance, gum trees. Wonderful timber, the best of the kind.
Good for whacking horses.
I'm sorry?
Good for whacking horses.
I suppose so, with the leaf, yeah, the leaves of the tree. Huh? They refine out? Oh, yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, all trees do that. Gums also need fire. They live in an economy of fire. They need fire to cure their diseases and to break open their seed pods. The bush needs fire occasionally to restore itself. And humans who think that they can live in the Australian dry sclerophyll forest are asking for disaster, I reckon. I wrote a letter to the Australian the other day, not the Australian, the Telegraph, suggesting Australians maybe should plant rainforest species in cities. Love gum trees, but don't try to live with them. Yeah, it was. The letter was totally ignored. It was nobody was going to bite on that one. Yeah.
Was it you that I heard, having researched that book, that the Nazis passed the law about being humane to an animal at that time, or?
No, not that I know of. No, I don't think Nazis were one way or another about animals. Good.
Not being an animal,
it was certainly a better idea to be an Alsatian than to be an autistic person or that sort of thing in Germany between the years 1933 and 1945. Cardinal Garland of Münster, Archbishop of Münster, actually preached against it in his cathedral and got away with it. He didn't get shot, and Hitler ordered a stop to the gassing of mentally what they call them, not the handicapped, they call them the unfit, and said, "We'll finish that job after victory, and I'll deal with Garland then." So that was the only time the church actually intervened effectually. And some have said that if the church had intervened about the Jews, that might have worked too, but nobody can say. I know one fella tried in Holland, and the Germans went round and picked up all the Jews they knew were hiding in attics and things and took them off to Auschwitz. So I got an idea Hitler would not have spared the Jews if the church had protested, but I still sometimes think, oh God, I wish they'd tried. You know, it would be less of a burden to carry if they'd at least tried. And I know a lot of Jews who will not have have a bar of the Catholic Church because of it. Yeah. That's a funny expression to have a bar of. I only just learned it's an Australian expression. A fellow, Englishman, said, I got this. His wife's name's Mary, and he said, yeah, Mary's got these funny Australian expressions. She says, I won't have a bar of that. And I said, is that one of ours? Yeah, and nobody else uses that. Yeah. I'm sorry? I think it means a bar of a tune. You know, I won't let you sing even a bar of that tune. Yeah. It must mean that, I think. Yeah. No, I don't think so. I'm just sort of my granny. One family called Holstein that I think I know they're relatives of mine, and they might have been blood ancestors. My father was always very secretive about that. He didn't like them, and I asked him once, "What do you got against the Holsteins?" I said, "Is that feeling about the Germans in the war?" And he said, "No." He said, "They're mad bastards." He said, "I just don't like them." Freddie Holstein tried to run over me in his youth. So I don't know. But it's only faint. It's only a faint connection. Where I come from is a very German parish, though, parish of Cranbach. It's called Cranbach, Nebiat Cranbach these days, and a very Catholic town. And it's not the usual Australian thing of mostly Irish names. It's about half and half German and Irish names. They were settlers from southern Germany in the middle of the 19th century who drifted gradually up the coast and became farmers. So names like Schubert, Schuberg, Weissmantel, all sorts of things are common up there. And we're always conscious that was a very German little area. And they sometimes had their stories to tell about having a bad time during the wars. Yeah.
Hardly anybody talks about the Armenians.
A poem. I came across, in a fairly mediocre anthology of Asian poetry, I came across two really good poems. They're both Armenian. One was about a bathhouse, and it was the most sensuous thing you ever read, you know. And the other one was about these women being burned alive in the street. And it was written by a fellow who was later himself killed in that very same genocide. His name, his nom de plume was Siamanto. His real name was Atom Yarjanian. And I got his name wrong in this book. It's mad. I gave him the wrong surname. The only mistake I'm conscious of having made, in fact, I'm deeply ashamed of it. But he talked about this, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It followed me around. And then Fred stood up and wanted to be written, and I knew the two were connected. I'm sorry. Yeah.
The Armenian genocide began in 1902.
Yeah, I know. That was what they call the first Armenian genocide.
Yeah. The second time. Now, a group who escaped in that period have come all the way to Australia. They settled in Alexandria.
Yeah.
And then when Nasser started his trouble, the Muslims started there about 1950s.
Yeah.
In Alexandria. They came to Australia and they're settled in Melbourne.
Yeah.
It's a group of them in our parish.
Yeah. All right.
You had the Orthodox and the Catholic that were both.
Yeah. Chatswood's a very Armenian suburb. It's got the church over there, and they live down Nuremberg, Willoughby that way. My wife used to teach a lot of them at Crow's Nest Boys High. They came, from the most part, they came from Iran or from Beirut. Driven, onwards by the politics happening there. Does anybody here know about the Assyrians? Apparently the Australian Army saved them at the end of the First World War. They were going to be genocided, and the Australian Army rescued them, and they all ended up in Sydney. But I'd like to know more about that. I sort of appealing for. Yeah. Yeah. If anybody knows about that, I'd be interested in that. I should maybe ring up SBS and say, put me on to somebody from the Assyrian community and let me find out. Oh, what? Is there? Yeah. What sort of Christianity is theirs? Orthodox. The people who put the half-hour mass to shame. I've been to a 4-hour liturgy. I went to a wedding once and it took an hour and a half of solid chanting for the people to get through the front door. They were well and truly married by the time they finished. Yeah, I like the Orthodox liturgy, but I think you've got to prepare yourself for it because it's big. Yeah.
Would you say that about your own Australian sense of humour?
I don't know much about my Australian sense of humour. It comes out, but I think it's a function of the nose. It kind of gets snorted down the nose. Yeah. No, it's just part of the inheritance of the culture. One of the nicer things of Australian culture. I'm not a complete fan of Australian culture, but that's one of the better things about it. It has a wise laughter in it sometimes. Been known to go a bit far. Best joke I heard in that kind this week, though. You'll love this one. The Australian flag was described by somebody as England by night. You'll never look at it the same way. Yeah, sir.
Could I ask a general question? As the publication of works such as Freddie Neptune, which I understand was awarded the T.S. Eliot Prize, the appearance of these quality works in Australia, has it made the study of poetry in our educational system any more popular or any more extensive, or isn't there...
I wouldn't think so, no. But high school turns kids off poetry by their tens of thousands. I've actually had them say, I will never read poetry again.
I thought works such as this, which would make it more interesting, may have stimulated...
Bad teaching will kill nearly anything. But, no, I don't know. I really don't know. It's a long time since... I used to go around schools a bit as a corrective at one time, reading poetry and trying to show what was involved, and it wasn't really up to drive them mad. But what I realised was that they were facing exams. Any pleasure they got in poetry at school, they were going to be punished for in the form of an exam. And if they didn't get big high marks in that exam, they wouldn't be allowed to be a doctorate out of Mercedes, And so there was no question of having pleasure and spiritual development in school. You were in there competing to cut the throat of your neighbour. I thought, this is no place for poetry. It does not belong there. It should be not part of school at all. Because school is such a terrible place. I have nothing to say in defence of school. I loathe school. Yeah, but no, Freddie hasn't had a very big reception in Australia anyway. It's better known overseas, I think, for some reason. Don't know why. It'll gradually catch up, I hope. But you never can predict whether a book is going to take off or sit there. And in Australia, Freddie has sat there and not been bought much, but England and America, fine. Yeah.
You of course said you hadn't given birth to a baby, and you became before, but having given birth to this book, how did you feel after you gave birth?
One thing you feel sometimes is you don't want to let it go. You've been so wound up in it and bound up in it that you don't want to let it go out there in the world and go its own way. I had less of that with Fred though. I thought, Fred won't allow me back in. Fred has said his last word and he's finished. And I never went back and tickled it at it and tried to change things and polish it. And that would take away its immediacy and its naturalness. And so I gave it it got up and walked straight away, and I didn't try and keep it at home in the playpen.
So did that give you a feeling of freedom?
Of which?
A feeling of freedom?
I'm very fond of Fred. I'm very glad to have written it. Yeah, it did. And I thought at least my what do you call him? Alter ego has grown up, even if I haven't. Another funny thing about Fred was I was about I'd say about 70% of the way through it when I went down with that coma. And one of the last things I remember thinking when I was at the point of what I thought was death was, damn it, now I want to get to see how Fred finished. And the other funny thing was now I'm going to die not having paid for my parents' gravestone because the bill had just come that week. They're going to have to add me to my parents' gravestone, and already we owe $3,100 on it. Weird things you think about when you think you don't. And I did come back, and I was very delighted to be able to find out how Fred finished. It might have helped me to come back, actually. Yeah.
I think perhaps hearing you read, I'm wondering what the separation between poetry and prose is. It could have been prose.
No, not if you see it on the page. It's all tuned to the length of lines. And the business of going part way across a page and then going back. And there's one comma's worth of pause at the end of a line, and you go back. And that makes a tremendous difference. And you can do all sorts of things in verse that you wouldn't get away with in prose. Prose is a very explanatory medium. It keeps wanting to explain, and poetry wants to evoke. And that's why I don't like prose much. I find it sticky and heavy stuff to manipulate. Yeah, sir.
I only discovered a few days ago that we can read your poems on the internet, and we can have you read them to us on the internet. So,
and I don't even have to be alive to do it. It's a whole new world of poetry, and I think it's one of the ways to escape from school and university too. The great escape for poetry in America, well, no, in Britain, not so much in America. In America, poetry is still a prisoner of the universities. In Australia, it is to a largest extent. But in Britain, the escape has been through the public reading, and going around and doing readings in art centres and libraries and places, pubs and so on too. And I think that's the internet offers something we've never had before, and that's the opportunity of reading the poem on the page in print and hearing it at the same time. People are not satisfied with poetry in books, and they're not satisfied with the reading either, because when they hear a reading, they're not catching. They hear a line, they try to savour that line, and there's 5 more lines have happened while they're trying to savour one. So it's going too fast for them. On the page, they're not hearing the voice. They don't quite know how to articulate it. But when they hear the voice and can read the poem, they're in favour. And we've finally got, I think, through the computer, an ideal way of presenting poetry.
how did that tour go, reading tour?
I'm sorry, what?
How did your reading
Oh, I do one every year in Britain, 1 or 2. And they go terrifically well. Big audiences and things. Yeah. I get decent audiences here too. I get quite big ones. Sometimes it's a bit political, but because I got a bit of a bad reputation politically. I think I'm some sort of redneck Hansonite running dog of capitalist something or other. And that can matter in a few places. Yeah.
I just have to weigh in on the side of teachers and poetry. While I admit that it's not perfect, there have been huge advances made in the last couple of decades in terms of poetry in schools. Kids have much more access to young poets.
You know what I was preaching against with schools? Not so much that. There have always been good teachers of poetry. I happen to have one. And I got turned on to poetry by a teacher.
No, we all had that perfect teacher.
If we all had that perfect teacher. If there was only some way to screen them out and find the ones and say, look, only you are allowed to teach poetry because the rest of them are goths and they'll stuff it up. You know, let them teach chemistry and things like that. Yeah. No, what I'm talking about, what I'm denouncing in school is not teachers. I'm denouncing the bullying, school bullying. School is an awful place because of exams and because of peer pressure. How they try to eat each other and sort each other out. In that way, and that takes up most of the energy in schools. So I'd say if education is 25% of what happens in schools, you're lucky. Yeah.
We talked this morning about collective pressure in Australia.
Yeah.
Do you find it in the country in Mandate you're freer of that pressure?
Enormously.
Or in many ways, the way we see it in the cities, that there's a lot more conformity in the country in many ways.
In some ways, but not in others. No. My father was terrified of it, and one of the reasons my mother died was because my father was afraid of the dreadful gossip he thought would be spread by the local telephonist, who was an unhappy woman, and terrible gossip. And he was trying to talk to a doctor over the phone without giving the doctor any details of what was happening to my mother in the collapse, because he was afraid of Aunt Jane. But in the end he found, and this I think he found unbearable, he found that he had been wrong. Nobody ever said an unkind word. There was no gossip. He was afraid of a phantom, and it didn't happen. And a lot of eccentricity is tolerated. I think having a bit of space around you makes for it. They say everybody's a prince on 100 acres. You know, you get away with a lot just by having land around you. And the fact that you own something means you can be in the way of everybody else if they dislike you. So they tend to treat each other with a certain diplomatic kind of reserve, if you like. And a lot of them will stay, well beyond the point of any kind of economic sanity. They'll stay on their farm trying to survive because they never want to be employees. They don't want to be under a boss. The great thing in the world is to be your own boss, according to all my relatives. You got your own bit of dirt and you're your own boss, even if you're living on Sayo biscuits. And that was the idea I grew up with, and I guess I never grew out of it. I never could stand being an employee. Some of my relatives used to mutter behind their hand, bloody employees, they're not grown up, Anybody who works for another fellow, he's not really quite an adult, is he? And, I mean, it's a ruthless way to look at the world, but that's what farmers deep in their hearts think. They don't think that employees are quite adult.
Les, yeah. Excuse me butting in. I think we could go on for quite a bit longer, but thank you very much for coming along here this morning. I think Caroline Jones put words on what many of us would have been thinking, that you were able to give form and shape and expression to what many of us would love to be able to do, but we're not quite the artist that you are. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment, your generosity, and thank you for your honesty. You're a very transparent man.
You've been a very good public to talk to. I hope I didn't offend anybody more than they needed to be offended.
A couple of practical announcements. Lunch time is now 2 o'clock. We begin the workshops. Now, I've already mentioned that most of the workshops are on the next floor, so if you go up the stairs here, 5 of them are down that, 2 of them are down that way, 5 of them are down that way, and Emma Pierce's workshop is in here. So those of you who have booked in for lunch and paid your dues, it's down the end of the draft board corridor. I think it's the last room on the right. So see you in your various workshops at 2 o'clock. And thank you very, very much.